The concept of the show that you guys are going to see here came from a research trip early in spring. I was asked to be the curator and the artist for the exhibit that you're about to see. And I knew the research had to go behind the actual images that were seen. So myself, GDI Publishing in Saskatoon, and Rachel from Swift Current Museum collectively gathered, and we set up the research trip to go explore the landscape in the southwest Saskatchewan area. What I found that connected everybody on this land was the sky itself. So you'll see in a lot of the images, the skyscape actually reflects the emotions of the people, the ancestry of the people, and the future emotions of the people to come.
The history of Metis in southwest Saskatchewan was kind of a perfect topic for us because in the past, the museum has commissioned research. Hugh Henry commissioned Barb Parchment to do just some collect research a few years ago, and there's been a few other people in the province, like Kathy Grant was doing some research, and Saskatchewan Parks was doing some research about the landing. So it was kind of a time when a lot of people were doing research on this subject. And because we're a regional museum and our mandate is all of southwest Saskatchewan, it seems like a perfect time to gather all that research, pull it together, and come up with some kind of really neat way to put an exhibition together about it. So we contacted GDI, and I got in touch with Karen, and Karen suggested George because he's an artist, so he would have that kind of art historian sort of perspective. So he could, there could be a combination of research and visual arts, and we thought, well, that sounds really cool. So we decided to go ahead with it.
Well, we feel that there are many untold stories about the Métis role in Canada and in Saskatchewan, especially in southwestern Saskatchewan. And so to have those stories be revived and remembered and retold is very important to us because it shows that we had a presence here from the very early days of the province.
My first knowledge coming into this land was based purely on an academic point of view. My family reaches back to early 1600s record according to this land, and it even dates back to Normandy, France. So coming from Winnipeg, Manitoba, and having ancestors relating to the Red River, and I know cousins and relatives actually traveled towards Batoche and towards the Swift Current area to come and work this land. I remember hearing some old stories from some of the First Nations elders in the areas about how they had treaties with a lot of the Métis families in this area as well too. So I'm thinking they really did help each other survive, as opposed to what some of the research shows where they were always fighting against each other. Collectively, I think the traditional stories tell that everybody got along and they helped each other out in this area. The ancestors speak through the stones that are on this land, if you put it that way. There's a traditional teaching that the stone itself holds all the knowledge of what Earth has become over the last, since science shows billions of years old. But those stories are embedded in the stones, and it records a history. So really the land spoke to me. It showed me the colors that needed to be painted. It showed me the people who I were to speak about. And that's basically where it came from, was just walking the land and just letting go and letting the land speak to me on how it wanted to be presented through the physical character of the paint. So when I was putting the images of the paintings together, I started with the skies. And I really have to think about colors and what's going to come forward, what's going to set back. I need to think of it like a sculpture would when he's molding a piece of clay to get that 3D look or that sense of depth. Colors definitely play a role in that. They play a role in that in real life as well too. So when I was doing the sky, I had to make sure the darkest colors fall back. But since the sky is further in the distance background, I also had to make sure that the brightest colors also fall back. Very tricky to do sometimes. So the technique I did was a wet on wet technique where I actually started blending the colors together. So if you look here in this area, this is kind of an ultramarine blue, then it starts to get a little bit lighter. And then the red that goes on top, so there's layers of color here. As the red sits on top of the blue, it becomes a dark purple. But you switch the layers around, it becomes a lighter purple. So it's interesting how this starts to play and starts to flow. And it's called the colors also start to bleed in its own form. And then that actually smooths out with a dry brush. That allowed me to apply more layers and get different textures like these. Almost cloud-like shape is what you would see in the sky itself. And as it comes down, as you notice that the bright colors, which you thought would come forward, actually still set itself back. And the reason why it sets itself back is because I have the skull here, and that's in the foreground. And then the foreground of the skull, I also use the same technique, just with different colors and different shades. I could have spent hours and hours listening to some of the elders speak into this area. When I mean to elders, I also mean to some of the European elders. They grew up in this area as well too, and even seen some of the hardships. Even they went through the hardships also in this land. So I think their retelling of their story and their family history is the utmost important here. And I just became that tool that was able was allowed to use that story and inspiration from them. There's a reason why I did the landscapes and I didn't focus on particular families in general, even though the stories come from the families. But I think the land tells the story about everybody who's walked this land here, from our First Nations people up to 40-something thousand years ago, right up to our present time, from Metis to the Europeans that were coming out to farm the area as well too. This whole land has a history, and I believe everybody deserves to know the timeline, if you will. But I also see a timeline doesn't exist because of the way some First Nations and Métis look at what time is, which is circular as opposed to linear. Again, a lot of philosophy there too you could go into and do that research, that inner research also. The white shadow figure here, this is the representative of Donald Gunn. And through the text, you'll see the historical text on this man. But basically, he was pushed out on the brigs of city life here and was forced to actually live on the land, where he went out and picked up bison bones and skulls and horns, polished them up, created his own artwork for them, and was able to sell them to tourists and people coming across on the train or whoever was walking by. That was one of his stories. That's how he survived and started making a living.
There are some people who have been telling stories such as this, like Cecile Blanc or Royce Pettyjohn in Maple Creek, Kathy Grant in Val-Marie, but this is the first time that it's really been drawn together and made as public as it is. Because our goal is to tour the show, then it will be more. I think this is probably the most public and the most exposure that this kind of history has ever had in Southwest Saskatchewan.
I love the vibrancy of George's work, and it's been a pleasure to work with Rachel in the Swift Current Museum. And I think it's been a learning experience for both of us that's been very valuable.
You know, I really enjoy philosophy. And to sit down and have a good discussion with someone and not worrying about who's right, who's wrong, but just an overall sense of, I'm going to get a chance to know something. I'm going to get some new knowledges in myself that I've never experienced before. I'm going to learn something and hopefully pass something on to someone else that might be interested as well too.
If you have program ideas that you'd like to see on Local On Demand, write us at max.local@sasktel.com. Max local programming is now available online at maxonline.sastel.com.